Warning: this episode contains descriptions of violence against women. Welcome to Australian Crime Stories. Make sure to follow on your listening platform and social media to stay up to date with the latest episodes. In 1942, wartime Melbourne lived under the dim, uneasy glow of the Brownout, a city cloaked in half-darkness to hide from Japanese bombers. By day, it bustled with soldiers, trams, and factory workers. But by night, the familiar streets turned dark and silent. Within the shadows, crime escalated with one predator in particular. 3 women were found strangled to death within days of each other. What was implemented for safety quickly became the advantage of a killer. Uncover the dark corners of this unique country with this chapter, The Brownout Strangler. This is Australian Crime Stories. (1942). The war had reached Australia's doorstep. Just 3 months earlier, Japanese bombs had fallen on Darwin, killing hundreds and shattering the illusion that the fight was far away. Rumours of invasion ran through every neighbourhood. When darkness fell, Melbourne dimmed with it. The government called it the Brownout, a partial blackout designed to make the city less visible to enemy aircraft. Street lamps glowed faintly, trams ran with shaded headlights, and pedestrians moved through half-dark streets. It was a city transformed. The daytime hum of trams, factories, and newsboys shouting headlines about Tobruk or New Guinea gave way at night to an eerie stillness broken only by the occasional passing of an army truck. People stumbled on uneven pavements, colliding in the dark. The Brownout made every corner uncertain, every shadow a question mark. And then came the Americans. Tens of thousands of US troops poured into Melbourne after the fall of the Philippines. General Douglas MacArthur made the city his headquarters, and suddenly the streets were filled with new accents and crisp uniforms. Shopkeepers painted "Welcome Yanks" on their windows. Dances were organised in town halls. Photographs of smiling soldiers and young women filled the papers. But beneath the surface, tension simmered. Australian men, underfed and exhausted from years of war, resented the confident Americans who seemed to have everything: silk stockings, cigarettes, chocolate, and charm. Physical fights often broke out between the two during drunken nights. In the pubs along Swanston Street and the dance halls of St Kilda, soldiers mingled with local women. They drank, they danced, and they flirted. The American soldiers had higher pay and exotic accents, making them a novelty to wartime Melbourne women who were otherwise confined by rationing and the absence of local men. After their socializing was done, they would walk back to the barracks in the darkness of the Brownout. But the same conditions that cloaked the city from enemy bombers also gave shadows for criminals to hide within. While the government and media at the time downplayed the issue to preserve morale, police records, military reports, and later historical analyses show that the Brownout created a significant rise in assaults, theft, prostitution, and violence. Melbourne at night was no longer safe. Criminals quickly realised that police patrols couldn't easily identify suspects in the dark, and witnesses could rarely describe attackers. Sunday, 3rd of May, 1942. Melbourne awoke to another morning under wartime dimness. The air was sharp with early winter, and the Brownout curtains still hung drawn across windows. Outside, the city was eerily quiet. The trams had not yet begun to run their full routes, and in the faint grey of dawn, Victoria Avenue in Albert Park was still half asleep, rows of terrace houses, corner pubs, and shuttered shop fronts resting in silence. At about 6 o'clock, a local milkman named Harold Gibson pushed his cart along the footpath. He had done this route for years, past the Bleak House Hotel, down to the grocer's, then across to the small row of stores facing the tram stop. As he neared 191 Victoria Avenue, something caught his eye. A dark shape slumped in a doorway. At first, he thought it was a bundle of rags, or someone sleeping off a rough night. That wasn't unusual. Since the Brownout began, the city's streets had become hiding places for drinkers, drifters, and the displaced. But as Harold drew closer, he saw pale flesh beneath the fabric and a shoe twisted at an impossible angle. He stopped his cart. A US soldier was standing nearby, staring at the doorway. When Harold looked toward him, the man shifted awkwardly, mumbled something, and began to walk away. His gait was unsteady, and the glint of his uniform buttons caught the morning light. Harold watched him go, confused, before turning back to the doorway. The woman was clearly dead. She lay on her back, half undressed, her skirt pulled up, her coat torn. Her stockings were ripped at the knee. Her throat bore the dark imprint of fingers, bruises deep enough to be seen even in the weak daylight. Harold ran to a nearby hotel and telephoned the police. Detectives arrived within the hour. Among them were Detective Sergeants Bill Hunter and Maury Field from the Victoria Police Homicide Squad, newly formed and still finding its footing. The sight before them was brutal and baffling. There were no clear signs of robbery. The woman's purse lay beside her, still containing coins and a few shillings. Her shoes had not been taken, her jewellery was untouched. The bruising around her neck suggested strangulation by hand. The marks were so defined that police remarked that they could see where each fingertip had pressed. Neighbours who saw the police at the scene were able to confirm that a woman living nearby matched the description. Her name was Ivy Violet McLeod, aged 40. Ivy was a factory worker who lived alone nearby. She was described by neighbours as quiet, reliable, and reserved. She represented the many women who kept wartime industries running while men were away. Her life was modest and orderly, long shifts, rationing, and solitary walks home through the darkened streets. On the night before, she had been seen drinking alone in several hotels. Witnesses remembered her chatting with soldiers, laughing, dancing, and drinking beer. She was last seen leaving a pub around 10 p.m, walking in the general direction of Albert Park. They focused on the lead from Harold, the American soldier he saw nearby. Police canvassed the area, questioning soldiers from the nearby Camp Pell and Albert Park barracks. Hundreds of American servicemen were in the city that week, and nearly all fit the same rough description. The leads blurred into one another. The local papers the next day reported it as the Brownout murder. No one had yet suspected that it would be just the beginning. It was early morning on Saturday, the 9th of May, barely a week since Ivy was found. At around 4 a.m, a night watchman named Henry McGowan made his rounds. His job was to patrol the empty streets of the central city, checking buildings, closing gates, and ensuring nothing was disturbed. His path took him down Spring Street, past closed cafes and shuttered shops, toward Morningside House, a modest boarding house known to house a mixture of tenants, from office clerks to night shift workers. As he approached the building, Henry saw something that made him stop. At the base of the stone steps leading to the entrance lay a figure, a woman. She was half hidden in shadow, her body oddly still. For a moment he thought she might be asleep, drunk from the night before, but something in the shape of her posture told him otherwise. He stepped closer, flashlight in hand. The beam revealed a face pale and bruised, lips pressed tight, eyes closed. Her neck bore the dark marks of a strangler's grip. Her blouse was torn, her stockings ripped. Rain had dampened her hair and slicked her clothes to her skin. A purse lay at her side, untouched, with coins still inside. Henry's breath quickened. He turned away and ran to find a nearby police station. His voice was taut as he reported what he had found. A woman dead, lying at the bottom of the steps, strangled. Within minutes, police cars arrived. Bill Hunter and Maury Field were among the first on scene. Under their lantern light, constables cordoned off the area. The steps became a crime scene, photographed, examined, and recorded in meticulous detail. A sheet was draped over the body, shielding her from the curious few who had begun to gather in the dim street. Detectives quickly recognized a disturbing pattern. Both she and Ivy McLeod had been strangled at night in inner Melbourne streets, their clothing torn and bodies partially exposed, yet neither had been sexually assaulted. The methodical nature of the attacks, combined with the boldness of striking in public areas under the cover of the brownout, indicated a physically strong and confident offender. They were beginning to realize that the brownout had become a veil that concealed something darker. Under its shadow, a predator moved. The woman's identity was soon confirmed. Pauline Buchan O'Brien Thompson, 31. She lived in Bendigo, 150 kilometres from Melbourne, with her police officer husband and their 2 children. She had travelled to Melbourne for a temporary stay, renting a room at the Morningside boarding house. She worked as a typist by day and a switchboard operator by night. She was known for dressing neatly, taking care with her appearance, and carrying herself with quiet confidence. Those who knew her described her as sociable, independent, and well-spoken, someone who enjoyed the company of friends and nights out in the city's modest cafes and dance halls. Investigators began retracing Pauline's last night. Witnesses said she had been seen drinking at various hotels in the CBD, chatting with American soldiers. She was a noticeable warm energy moving through the night. She had plans to meet Justin Jones, an American soldier at the American Hospitality Club, but he was 30 minutes late. Frustrated by the delay, Pauline decided to leave and was later seen at the Astoria Hotel with another soldier. They were observed leaving the hotel just before midnight. Detective Hunter ordered another canvass of the American soldier camps. Soldiers were questioned about their whereabouts that night, their acquaintances, and whether they had seen Pauline Thompson. Rumors spread quickly. Some said a man in uniform had been seen following her. Others claimed to have heard screams, but nothing was conclusive. Curiosity had given way to caution. Passers-by glanced at the cordon around Morningside House and moved quickly on. Word had spread among city workers. A murderer was on the loose. The pressure was mounting. The public was restless. Mothers warned daughters. Women avoided certain streets. Detectives instructed patrols to increase presence in dim streets, particularly near tram stops and late-night venues. But manpower was scarce. Many officers were seconded to wartime duties, and the streets were already thinly patrolled under blackout conditions. They had 2 victims within a week on their hands and suspected an American soldier, but there were hundreds of them. May 14th, 5 days since Pauline's body was found. In South Melbourne, the narrow streets were slick from overnight drizzle, the air thick with the smell of bread from early bakeries, and the faint scent of coal smoke drifting over the rooftops. At about 5:45 a.m., Thomas Watson, a baker making his morning deliveries, turned into Clarendon Street, a stretch of road lined with shuttered shop fronts and dim streetlights. He knew the route well. It was part of his daily round. But as he passed the corner near a closed tailor's shop, something caught his eye. A shape lying awkwardly in the doorway, half hidden in shadow. He paused, thinking at first it might be someone drunk or sleeping rough. But as he stepped closer, the outline resolved into the unmistakable form of a woman. Her legs were twisted beneath her. Her coat was torn open, and in the pale, watery light of early morning, her face appeared motionless, pale, and marked by bruises. Thomas hesitated only a moment before running to a nearby phone box. Minutes later, police arrived, led by Hunter and Field, who by now knew the grim pattern too well. The scene was almost identical to the others. The woman had been strangled by hand. Her clothing was disordered, but her handbag remained beside her, untouched. No money missing, no jewelry taken. The victim was quickly identified as Gladys Hosking, aged 40. She was living alone at the time in Parkville, near the University of Melbourne. She worked as a clerk in the university's chemistry department, one of the many civilian positions filled by women while men were away fighting overseas. She was well liked by her colleagues and known for her punctuality, modesty, and reserved nature. She often took walks home from work, preferring the familiarity of routine over the uncertainty of wartime Melbourne's public transport schedules. The night before, she had been seen leaving a theatre in the city. Witnesses recalled her talking briefly with a tall man in an American uniform before the 2 parted ways near a tram stop. An Australian soldier guarding some vehicles told police that he had been approached by an American soldier covered in mud who asked him how to get back to the Camp Pell. Under the weak daylight, photographers documented the doorway in silence while detectives took notes. The third murder in less than 2 weeks. Same method, same conditions, no robbery, no weapon. The certainty of a single killer hardened into fact. A confidential report was prepared.
We are dealing with a dangerous and determined killer. Victims appear to be chosen at random, but with a clear pattern. The use of strangulation and the deliberate positioning of bodies indicates a single offender with method and motive.
By mid-morning, news had spread. The fear that gripped the city was no longer potential bombers, but a killer amongst their community. The breakthrough came in the form of a tip from an unexpected source. An American soldier named Gallo came forward to police to implicate his comrade Edward Joseph Leonsky. On a night drinking in a St. Kilda hotel, Edward had bragged to Gallo about attacking women during the Brownout. He claimed to have taken something from one woman and boasted about how easy it was to move unseen in the dark. He even said to him,
"I killed Gallo. I killed."
Initially, Gallo dismissed it as drunken boasting, but later when news articles about the Melbourne murders appeared, Edward pointed out one case to him, saying,
"Doorstep, that is the one."
Gallo went on to reveal more about Edward's behavior. At one point, Edward said to him,
"Did you ever hear of a werewolf? Did you ever hear of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde? I'm like him, 2 personalities."
This was not simply metaphorical flourish. According to Gallo, Edward took the idea further. When drunk, he would sometimes even walk on hands and knees, mimicking animalistic motion, as if embodying an alternate, predatory self. He told Gallo that one side of his personality had said of him,
"You have a baby face, but underneath you are vicious."
Edward Leonsky was based at Camp Pell. Police obtained permission from US military authorities to question Edward. At first, he denied involvement. He offered alibis for the nights of the murders, but they did not hold up under scrutiny. In actual fact, he was on leave the night each woman was murdered. When questioned more closely, Edward became defensive. His answers were inconsistent and his attitude unsettled officers. Hunter and Field grew certain they had their man. On the evening of the 15th of June, police moved in. Edward Leonsky was taken quietly from Camp Pell under military escort. The arrest was a shock to his comrades, who had not suspected him. For the public, it was the first glimmer of relief. The Brownout Strangler might be caught. At the police station, Edward was interrogated over several days. He was questioned by both Australian police and US military authorities, and although he initially maintained his innocence, he eventually confessed to the murders in detail. His supposed motive was to do with women's voices, stating,
"I bought a few drinks. There was a girl, she had a nice voice. She sang. When we left the hotel, she sang as we walked along. I grabbed her. I don't know why. I grabbed her around the neck. She stopped singing. I wanted that voice. I choked her."
The trial of Edward Leonsky unfolded under unusual and complex circumstances. As an American soldier stationed in Australia during World War II, his crimes fell under the jurisdiction of the United States Army rather than the Australian courts. Agreements between the two governments ensured that American personnel remained subject to US military law while abroad. This arrangement meant that although Edward's murders occurred in Melbourne, he would face justice through a US military court, an extraordinary situation that underscored the tangled relationship between wartime duty and jurisdiction. Edward was tried before a general court-martial, the highest form of military tribunal. This process carried the authority to impose any sentence permitted under military law, including death. Proceedings followed a rigid legal structure, beginning with the formal reading of charges and continuing through witness examinations and the presentation of evidence. Edward was provided counsel, though little is known about the details of his defense. The prosecution assembled a strong case built on eyewitness accounts and, most decisively, Edward's own confession. During interrogation, he admitted to strangling Ivy Violet McLeod, Pauline Thompson, and Gladys Lillian Hosking, describing the circumstances of each killing in disturbing detail. Witnesses placed him near the victims' homes at crucial times, further reinforcing the prosecution's argument. His confession, combined with the corroborating testimony, left little doubt of his guilt. The defense's position is less clearly documented, though it likely centered on questioning the validity of Edward's confession and appealing to mitigating factors such as his heavy drinking and unstable mental state. Whatever arguments were made, they did not alter the outcome. After reviewing the evidence, the court-martial panel delivered its verdict on July 17, 1942. Edward was guilty of murder. The sentence was immediate and absolute, death by hanging. The verdict and sentence were later confirmed by General Douglas MacArthur, bringing the case to its final conclusion under US military authority. Edward was transferred to Pentridge Prison in Melbourne, a facility long associated with capital punishment. On the 9th of November 1942, at the age of 24, Edward Leonsky was hanged within Pentridge's walls. The case of Edward Joseph Leonsky ended with his execution, but the fascination surrounding his personality and motives has endured far longer. Behind the violence and the military uniform was a young man whose life reflected both deep instability and the contradictions of wartime existence. Edward was born in New Jersey in 1917, the sixth of 9 children in a poor and turbulent family. His childhood was marked by hardship, instability, and exposure to violence. His mother, afflicted by mental illness and alcoholism, exerted a controlling influence over her children, particularly Edward, who was known to be deeply attached to her. Several of his brothers also suffered from mental or emotional disturbances. This early environment of dysfunction and fear would later be cited by psychiatrists as significant in shaping his psychological fragility. In his youth, Edward was described as quiet but erratic, a boy with charm and intelligence but prone to sudden mood shifts. Before enlisting, he developed a reputation for heavy drinking and unpredictable behavior, traits that intensified after joining the army. Those who served with him in Australia recalled him as a friendly and even likable man when sober, yet one whose personality transformed completely when he drank. It was during those states of intoxication that his darker impulses seemed to emerge. Military psychiatrists noted that Edward exhibited signs of severe neurosis and a distorted self-image. He was described as emotionally immature, with obsessive tendencies and an almost childlike fixation on women's voices. The voice motive, his claimed desire to possess or take a woman's voice, revealed both a sexualized and symbolic impulse. It suggested an internal confusion between affection and destruction, a compulsion to silence what he found beautiful rather than preserve it. Despite these apparent signs of dissociation, medical assessments concluded that Edward was legally sane. The army psychiatrists determined that he understood the nature and wrongfulness of his actions, rejecting an insanity defense. To them, his behavior reflected moral depravity rather than psychosis. He was classified as a man with deep emotional abnormalities, but sufficient control and comprehension to be held accountable. In the years since, criminologists and historians have continued to debate Edward's nature. Some see him as a product of his environment, a mentally unstable young man unfit for the pressures of war and freedom in a foreign land. Others regard him as a predator whose crimes revealed innate sadism masked by charm and sociability. The Brownout murders became a case study in both military justice and the psychology of deviance. Edward's trial and execution also raised broader questions about jurisdiction and responsibility. His case was the first and only time an American serviceman was executed in Australia under US military law, a precedent that underscored the uneasy balance between national sovereignty and military discipline during wartime alliances. Edward Leonsky's story resists simple classification. He was a soldier, a murderer, and a man seemingly at war with himself. His fascination with women's voices, that strange and haunting fixation, has come to symbolize the confusion at the core of his psyche, attraction and destruction intertwined. Thanks for listening. Follow on your listening platform to be notified of weekly episodes.